Third meeting of the, thank you. The third meeting of the Berkeley Police Review Commission's Committee on Parole and Probation Searches and Questioning. Welcome everyone. We have Commissioner Allamby, Commissioner Roberts, Lieutenant Montgomery, Mr. Winston Burton of the NAACP, Mr. Id-Deen of the NAACP, and we have Mr. Elliot Halpern. Welcome.
I'm also on the ACLU board.
Oh, I didn't realize that, thank you. And Christine Schwartz, who is videoing us, and an additional member of the public,
Francine Schwartz.
Francine Schwartz.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome everyone, and Mr. Byron Norris, the commission investigator, is joining us.
Just briefly.
Briefly, thank you. Public comment. I would like to, we have members of the public here, but as we've been doing in the past, I would like to not restrict their comments to the public comment period of 2 minutes, because I'd like to have a more free-flowing conversation. So are there other members of the public who would like to speak before we begin?
I would. I think it's an exciting time we're moving into, because the situation with the post-release searches is extremely important. I've witnessed several on the streets in South Berkeley where I work. It's inhumane and humiliating. And I think even with General Order B4, it talks about probable cause. So, you know, I'm excited to see the Oakland policy and hope that we can take the best parts of that particular policy and move forward with Berkeley establishing its own policy as soon as possible.
Thank you. I'd like to use you as a resource as we continue to discuss.
Sure, absolutely.
Approval of the agenda. Commissioners?
Fine.
Second?
Yeah.
Thank you. All in favor? We're all in favor. So the old business is the same as last time. Continue our discussion of possible policies here in Berkeley to change a bit of the searching of parolee and probationers and others under supervised release status. Last week at the meeting, I think I called your attention to, no, that came out on Saturday, so I didn't call your attention to it, but you all probably saw the front page article in the San Francisco Chronicle about the Oakland restrictions that passed unanimously in the Oakland City Council. This morning, there's a San Francisco Chronicle, their editorial is devoted to applauding that policy. I thought that was interesting.
First in the state.
First in the state, first in the state, yeah. And so, I don't know how you all would like to proceed. I passed around to the commissioners and I believe to others some more detail on the other states' restrictions. I don't know, I find, in my opinion, it would perhaps be too long a discussion to go into each of those. I passed them out for your information because you asked for more information on the other states. California is one of only 9 states that has this kind of suspicionless search without conditions attached to people in supervised release status. So I gave you a little bit of detail on some of the other states' restrictions. Some of them restricted to the parole supervisors and probation officers. Others restricted to reasonable suspicion, and you know, there's Alaska, I think Alaska and North Carolina restricted to the supervisors. Anyway, you can read that at your leisure, but so California is one of 9 states that allows for this. Yes.
There was also an article
beginning of this week, I believe in the East Bay Times, and highlighted the Professor Jennifer Eberhardt's statistics that show there was a 93% stoppage, and I think it was only, there was a 70% or of people had never committed any crime of the African Americans who were stopped. So I had that paper at home. I think my son, he took it or whatever. But I thought it was a very interesting article. I'm gonna try to find it and get it and bring it back to this group.
Because Professor Eberhardt's study was cited in all these other sources too. And it is, in fact, it's my understanding, and by the way, in the preface to the policy, the commission's policy that was voted in by the city council, in the preface to that, it goes through all of the various, the background leading up to this in Oakland, and it shows just how a long process that was and how many stakeholders were involved, besides the department, the commission, Alameda County District Attorney, the Alameda County Public Defender's Office, a whole variety of stakeholders and experts. It's my understanding, and I could be corrected if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the department initiated this process subsequent to receiving Professor Eberhardt's study. Her study was commissioned either by the department or by the independent monitor, I'm not sure which, but subsequent to finding those statistics that Winston just cited. The department, in fact, wrote a first draft of this policy in order to try to restore some of the community trust that they had lost, partly as a result of these kinds of questioning and searches. And so it was interesting to me, the department initiated this and then took their proposal to the commission, and then the commission wrote their own proposal. I think this is the itinerary. The commission wrote their own proposal. The two of them took their proposals to the council. The council said, these two were different. Go back and see if you can collaborate and work on reconciling your differences. So they went back. They did a great deal of work together and came up still with two different policy or drafts that they proposed to city council. City council they said they thought the commission one was less vague, I believe, on the question of what constitutes a serious felony, as well as the wording in how do you know that somebody is on parole and probation. So the council endorsed the commission version, but I would argue, and I've been through both with a fine-tooth comb, they're very similar, and I've redlined some of the main differences.
Okay, my take on it is this. We should be in the same position, right? The department didn't initiate this, but on the other hand, we want to do something to initiate and then work with the department.
That's right.
Right?
Totally.
So we would come up with our best shot. We would ask them to respond and come up with theirs and see if we could meld them together.
That's right.
I think Eberhardt did the Stanford study.
That's
I
right.
think
That's his
I read the Stanford study.
Yeah.
It's like this thick.
Yeah, it's 50
And
recommended.
it was saying many things very much like the CPE study did here. It was kind of along those lines.
That's right.
But it was clear that the department in Oakland was, saying, okay, we understand what has happened and we're willing to, come forward with some solutions. And I think that's what you're talking about. So for us, it seems like, getting to the point would be looking at the language. You proposed these two sets of language in your memo.
I'd set that aside for the moment, though.
Okay, but then we need to get focused on what portions we're gonna
That's right.
deal with today.
That's right. That's
So-
what I'd like to do.
And one of them is looking at what I would say in both versions. There's a commission version and a department version, I guess. They're talking about section B3 in attachment A.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if everybody has that, but that talks about, it says inquiring about supervised release status. That's one issue, right? Are there other issues, or are we focusing on just that today?
There are other issues. I mean, I think there are a couple of other issues.
Okay, then what are they, so we can get down to like, let's go
Yeah.
to 1, 2, and 3 or something?
Sure, I'm gonna make my exit, but I just want
Okay.
to point out that the bathrooms and waterfront are directly across the lobby here in that hallway,
Okay,
okay?
okay.
So if we could get focused on what issues we're gonna try to get to today, that
Yeah.
would be good.
Yeah. Could I, before we do that, and I agree with you, I'd like to go through the two and see what it is we can agree with. Yeah. But the other thing is, I think we need to start seriously considering who else we want to involve in our discussion.
Mhm.
And I'd like to ask the lieutenant if you think there are other people in the department who you'd like to, or the chief would like to bring to these committee meetings, or whether you wanna wait till we go to the commission.
So I did discuss it with the chief. We could potentially invite parole or probation, somebody there that could come and enlighten us on their views of the issues. We could also, I think, probably would be prudent, because anytime a policy diverges from law, then in that space, there's potential for liabilities incurred by the city and or by the officers doing the conduct.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably should, we should be able to arrange to have the city attorney come and answer some of those questions in detail.
Mhm.
There are some concerns that an officer's conduct could be completely lawful under state law, federal law, not a violation of someone's civil rights, but then be rendered to a situation where they would be liable for their conduct under this rule.
Okay. What
So
about-
we probably should have them come talk about that.
In that vein, what about the Alameda County District Attorney? Would he,
I think that would be of value. The Alameda County District Attorney has a group called Law and Motions, that they're sort of, they specialize in, analyzing case law and, sort of giving out advice to police officers. Some of the publications that we've shared come out of that group.
did you say law and motions or law in?
The group's called Law and Motions, so they're kind of the experts on case law, and especially, they've been especially valuable resource in terms of search and seizure issues for us. And I haven't reached out to them yet, but we could reach out and see if they would be available.
What are they under?
Under the district attorney's office,
Yeah.
They tend to, deal with these kinds of questions.
So are these people that we should have to our committee, or should it wait for the commission?
I can work on bringing it either way. I can tell you that, that especially on the issue of suspicionless probation searches, that we're further apart, and I think we have more, discussion and deliberation that's needed, more information that's needed.
As opposed to,
The first question, I think, on asking the question, is a simpler question, I think, in
Mhm.
terms of, impact, and, the second question is where we're really, talking about a major change that I think we need to give, really careful consideration.
Which is, the second question
The
is?
second question
Whether
about
you
whether or
can
not we
search.
should be conducting parole and probation searches. And I agree with Mr. Roberts that, in the meetings we've had so far, we've kind of jumped back and forth between these two questions, and they've kind of confused the issues around the other issue in a way that's made it difficult to kind of process.
that's why I think it could be useful. I mean, we started out this process, frankly, I didn't even realize that Oakland was on the verge of doing this already when we formed this committee. And I would prefer not to reinvent the wheel here. If there's already a policy that Oakland has passed, that has passed muster with the district attorney and I assume their city attorney, but I don't know that.
Their city attorney.
I assume they signed off on some of these papers, but anyway, they have, I think, in a brilliant fashion incorporated those issues in there. Those two things, the question and then the search. Yeah.
So is there any possibility, or you think any value in having a person, a consumer who actually has gone through this experience to share what it feels like to come and speak to either
Yeah.
the PRC or to the smaller?
Yeah, so who should we get? That's the question.
Someone that's,
I've been
I've been alerted to a member of the commission that has worked on this. And if I can get her in, I'm not sure I can.
I'm sorry, a member of our commission?
No, the
The Oakland?
Oakland Commission.
Okay.
That was very instrumental in putting, and she presented it to the council.
Mm-hmm.
And been introduced to her, and I've written her, and if we could get her to talk in, come in and talk to us about the whole process and what they.
And you think that would be useful at this point or
Well,
later on at the commission level?
Well,
See, I was thinking that we could bring some people in, and I don't wanna over-consume people's time.
sure.
You know, if these are people who have a lot on their agenda, I don't wanna have to bring them in 2 or 3 times. You know, first here and then the commission.
Well, you have to decide if that would be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah,
for you.
she's not someone who's had the experience of it, you know, that's not a follow-up, is it, on what Winston has just proposed?
I think it's a different.
It's a different proposal?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
So this is, somebody that's had hands-on in creating their policy.
And that's Commissioner,
I'll come up with it.
okay,
One reason I bring this up is because in the San Francisco article, there's a statement about somebody that's experienced it.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting, if not interesting,
Yeah.
might be a bad word, but I feel it's kind of revealing. And so sometimes I like to get the consumers to be able to share their story so you get the sense.
well, if you or others have, come into acquaintance with people, somebody who would be comfortable, you know, speaking.
I've spoken to Regina Jackson,
Uh-huh,
and she's the chairperson
Right.
of the Oakland Commission.
right,
And I can talk to her and see if she would be willing to come, but she's the one that helped put this together.
I know.
So they've already, did
So-
everything, had the interviews, and
so if you
so
and
we're
Elliot,
like reinventing the wheel that's already been.
right, so, maybe when you speak to her, if you speak to her, and Elliot too, when he speaks to the commissioner, he
Right.
does, you could let them know we'd be really interested to have their input, and let it be up to them, whether they think they should come to the committee or wait until we bring them to the commission.
Right, okay,
I suspect this is gonna be a long process, there'll be plenty of time
yeah.
at some point for them to, yeah. But again, if people know of people who experience these searches and have on-the-ground experience in that way, I know, of course, you and the department have plenty of experience in the searches on that side. Anyway,
I have a question then, on the 2 issues, which was, asking or searching, right?
Yeah.
Basically, those are the 2 issues. I see on the asking and I'm looking at attachment A then in the Oakland policy, that's in B3, attachment A, B3, it says inquiring about supervised release status. So that's addressed there. Where's the searching part?
later, can we start at the beginning and go through it? Cause the searching
Okay,
part
but
is,
I'm just trying to get down to the issues. It
Yeah.
seems like to me if we could get focused on what the issues are, then we
Okay.
could decide if we're going to, if we're liking the Oakland policy or something similar to it,
yeah,
it would be good then to get a feedback from the department, maybe at the next meeting, to see if we're,
right.
where they stand on it before we take the next steps. But, I mean, I could be done at the commission too, but.
The biggest difference that I see in these 2 policies is in the requirements for supervised release
What
searches.
number is that?
C,
C?
it's C.
C,
Well,
section C in
the
general?
numbers start to change because C, the numbers start to change because, C1, knowledge of searchable release status, is much longer in the approved policy. Let's call them the commission policy and the department policy, because to say Oakland is, so the commission policy that was accepted, C1 is much longer than in the department policy, which is more about, they include confirming, on C2, they make that C2. So the numbers begin to change a little bit in the C section. The difference I see.
Well, actually, the one I'm looking at, if it's the right policy for OPD department, C1 is like
Short.
three lines.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
And the other,
The commission one is very
the other is
long.
like 3 paragraphs.
Right, because they include, so the main difference, the substantive difference that I see in these two policies is that the commission policy, which was accepted by the council, requires a record check regardless of how you learn of the person's parole status. In the department policy, you see that paragraph at the end of number 2 under C2 of the department?
Does everybody have this, the OPD department? And
Long
it's like-
version of the short version.
it says agenda report, Sabrina Landreth or the subject OPD general.
Stamped
That's the OPD proposal.
Stamped June 27th at 8:34 p.m. on the front.
Yeah, dated June 10th. That's the one we're talking about here, and that would be C. Do you guys all have that?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, I'm
So,
sorry, go ahead.
That's all right.
I'm not
Under
sure everybody has it.
C2, after the bullet points, officers should view the use of prior knowledge of supervised release conditions versus a verifying database check in the same manner as they would view warrantless searches versus searches pursuant to a valid warrant. While the former have their place, and when used with proper discretion and adherence to law are legitimate law enforcement tools, the latter are the most defensible and shift the burden of proof away from the officer. What this is saying is that when you do find out about the supervised release status of an individual, either because somebody's told you within the past 40 days, you see on number 2, C2,
Yeah.
right here,
No, I understand.
either because someone's told you within the past 40 days, or because the person themselves let you know that. This says, use your discretion, but it's safer to do a record check to confirm. The commission policy basically says you must always do a record check. Those are the two serious differences. So if you stop someone as a police officer and you don't ask immediately about parole and probation, but it comes up in the conversation and you do eventually ask it, under the department version, you're not absolutely required to check the record. It encourages you to do it because it takes liability away from the officer. In the commission version, it requires you to check the record, which is what the council agreed to. Right. So that's and then in this process too, you'll notice there's a difference in timing. If you see in C2, just above the bullet points, what we were just looking at here.
Yeah, I got it.
They say within the past 30 days you have to have learned of their parole or probation status. In the commission version and the one that was accepted by the council, they say it has to be within the prior 72 hours. So in other words, if somebody informs you somebody's on probation 29 days ago, you can use that information in the commission version, it has to be within the previous 72 hours.
Where's that in the commission?
In
C2?
C1,
C1. Oh, I see, so.
just
oh, I
above
see.
that final
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
paragraph in
Okay.
C1. So those are, and that's considered a pretty important difference. So that plus the thing about you're required to check the records in the commission version, but not in the department version.
Mhm.
And, you know, the other differences are more, well, I noticed that there was a difference in the definition of violent crimes, you see. So the search in the Oakland policy, the search is allowed for anyone who is on probation or parole for a violent offense, but not for a non-violent offense. And the definition of violent offense in the department version, but not in the commission version, includes residential burglary. That was,
Just one thing, procedurally, at least from my standpoint, it seems like we'd be better to focus on the approved policy for what it is, because it's had public input and from the department and all those things. And then we should do whatever we're gonna do with that, because, you know, going with the OPD policy, I mean, BPD isn't OPD, and
Right.
so BPD needs a chance to look at, I think, the approved version, because I think that's gonna be what everybody is gonna be basing stuff on from here going forward, because they got an approved policy. And we could get then a response from BPD about how they're feeling about this language,
Okay.
rather than trying to compare the OPD language, because again, BPD isn't OPD,
no,
and so, you know, they may see it differently. That'd be my thinking on it, is proceeding ahead.
okay,
So we could either, if we did that, we could either get, we could have a discussion, if you like, about the, Oakland policy. We could then get, possibly at the next meeting, feedback from, BPD on it. Or, you know, if we go the commission route, we could do, you know, having more public testimony, or we could have that at the committee level.
right.
You know, either way, but I think focusing on there would keep it more simple.
I agree with that.
Unless we
I-
have, you know, if we have adds to that, that would be good, that would be okay, but.
One thing that I actually kind of like about the department version, it's a little bit more lenient, like I said, they don't require the record check, but one of the things I do like is that it's a little bit more straightforward without some of the rhetorical elaboration. But we can, you know, we can go through the approved policy and see what we think. Is that what, Gwen,
Yes,
do you agree with
that's
Terry?
How do you feel
approved,
about
and
it?
I think that we should do that.
Okay,
So
We may not end up with that, but the
Yeah.
bottom line is it gives us a base to go
This
from.
has already been approved, we can go over it, see if there's something in it that might help us with our Berkeley policy or not.
okay. And you all please chime in, cause you know, this is,
What I don't see in the policy, I've witnessed a situation at the Berkeley Flea Market. It's an African-American male, with, I'm assuming his wife, and they had 2 children with him, about 8 or 9 years old, 2 boys. And they were just walking, I guess going to their car, and the officer recognized him, I guess from past, and just pulled over and searched him right on the spot. You know, in front of his children, his wife, and the public.
right.
And then didn't find anything and let it go. There was no cause for that at all. It was just,
He recognized him
all-
because he recognized that he was on parole?
yes. He knew this person. Berkeley's a small community.
And
A lot
if
of
the,
African Americans live in South Berkeley, and he knew this guy, I guess, from past experience.
and as I understand the Oakland policy, that would be allowed except they'd be required to confirm on a record check
Yeah.
Oh,
But there was no probable cause at all.
it doesn't that doesn't
require-
require that. If it's for a violent offense that they're on parole or probation, it doesn't require probable cause if they're on parole or probation. They wouldn't be allowed to search if he was on parole or probation for a nonviolent offense.
In Oakland's.
In Oakland's,
adopted version.
that's right,
Yeah.
yeah.
The version that's on its way to being fully adopted.
Yeah, it still has to go to meet and confer, so I don't know what happened there, although,
In the internet,
yeah, but he was part of the process, so I doubt. I don't know, since the department was so involved in the creation of the policy, I don't know whether the union that does the meet and confer would deviate far from that. I don't know what the likelihood of that is,
So
but.
the likelihood that the union would, have serious issues with that are
Yeah.
pretty high. I imagine a lot of the groundwork was being done at the same time between the department and the union. But if the department and the union could not agree, you could expect that the union would really want that process.
Push back,
Yeah,
yeah.
because, obviously the, view that there are officer safety issues
Yeah.
involved and connected to not searching someone who, is on supervised release.
So,
Okay. It just seemed to,
my original proposal and preference was that searches of that sort not be allowed for anybody on parole or probation absent suspicion. And that would bring it into line with 32 other states.
I think that's.
We're trying to get something done here, and if that means that we have to be flexible on what we're proposing, I
I understand. But that's really concerning.
So we could propose a policy in Berkeley that instead of separating out violent and nonviolent offenses, we could say that all such searches require reasonable cause or suspicion or some language like that, which would then obviate that situation. That was my original preference, and we can go that route if that's what people decide.
I have a feeling that the final was a compromise.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
So that issue is problematic for the department, because we see it connected to duties, to public safety. Obviously, I'm hearing the concerns, the embarrassing situations, maybe not paying attention to things that are embarrassing to people. And so I wonder if we could get to a place where we're talking about, where the policy could speak to those issues in a way that mitigates those problems and issues without having a negative public safety impact potentially. That if we talked about how we're going to conduct searches, these lawful searches, the current law and US Supreme Court law are making them lawful, that we talk about, okay, the issues surrounding them, how we might approach them, describe how we might approach them better, to mitigate the bad feelings, embarrassing situations perhaps. Knowing that, unfortunately, whenever the police stop somebody, we're starting from a place where somebody doesn't want that to happen, right? Anybody who's stopped by the police, no matter the cause, generally isn't happy that the police have stopped them or pulled them over, and that's always our kind of starting point, and we're trying to work in a way that's professional and responsible and responsive to the community, so that we go from that place where somebody really wished you hadn't stopped them to saying, at least when I dealt with the Berkeley Police Department, they were professional, they were forthright with me, this felt just, although I did not want to be stopped today.
The example on service,
It's not that, it's that you don't stop everyone, you only stop people of color, that's the issue, and that's what we need to focus on.
But
If you were stopping Commissioner Calavita or Commissioner Roberts, then I don't think we would be sitting at this table now, but you're not. You're focused on color are not on probation and parole, but yet they have been asked that question. So we need to stay focused on the fact that it's not being across the board asked.
So I wasn't discussing the question, what I was discussing was suspicionless searches. That's why we keep kind of jumping back and forth between the question and the suspicious
But when you
searches.
stop someone
But
and
this was the
search
search that was
So-
so embarrassing, but,
Yeah.
and your example was somebody who wasn't stopped for any reason,
No,
except that the officer recognized them,
that's it.
yeah,
And knew them to be on probation or parole. if I
yeah,
understood you.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing, as being said, I mean, we're dealing with the disparity in stops already here in Berkeley.
Right,
So an African American or person of color is more likely to be stopped and victimized, I'll call it victimized, by, this kind of a situation.
And yet we make up a very small percentage of the city population. So right there it tells us it's biased. So what we wanna do is take out the bias, be fair and just across the board, so that we don't have these discussions and we don't feel that the police is victimizing people of color. I mean, the climate in this country right now is terrible.
mhm,
And I don't know if this is even making it more prevalent for the police to harass and abuse and disrespect and whatever else to the people of color. But we need to, in my opinion, come together with a policy that works for both, but eliminates this business of we're the only ones that should be targeted, when there's a lot of people that are committing crimes that don't look like me. But we're not targeting them, so.
shall we go through the Oakland policy now and
The
see what we,
commissioner's policy that.
yeah, the commission's
Yeah, okay.
policy that was approved. Terry, is that what you'd like to do? Go through and see what parts of it we think we should incorporate and which ones should be added to, or
it's fine with me.
that's what you'd proposed?
Well, yeah, there's either, yeah, I mean, I think it would be fine. I think, we need to get something from the department eventually on, the
Yeah.
next steps
Yeah.
here, so.
So can I go back real quick, cause, Ms. Allamby and I have not seen eye to eye on this issue, and so, and I really wanna respect your view and your viewpoint, and it's yours and you own it, and I never take that away from you. I wanna hear it, I wanna listen to it, but I, also think that it would be important for me to also express my viewpoint, as a leader in this organization, that I don't see the, targeting that you're describing, that our officers are conducting themselves, what I believe to be professionally. They're human beings, of course, and they're impacted by being humans, but, that I see our officers being professional, treating people well, being respectful, and that, while there are issues, to talk about, that I would not wanna talk about and, address, related to searches and the disparities that we've talked about. The CPE report also, I'm gonna say that every meeting said that the Berkeley Police Department, we should all be proud of the Berkeley Police Department, that we, of the 200 organizations that they have measured to that time, have the lowest disparity that they've ever measured. Now, that doesn't mean there's not room for improvement, that doesn't mean we can't do better with our community and listen better to our community and do a better job, but, from my perspective, respecting yours, I cannot, not respond to an allegation that the police department is targeting people based on their color. I understand that disparities do exist, but I just wanted to respond to that, and fully respecting your viewpoint and your right to see the world that way. That's,
Lieutenant, can I ask you a question about, because I've also believed that we're not talking about individual racism in the department or anything like that. Is it possible that the distribution of patrol cars is radically different in different parts of Berkeley? Because I know of events in South Berkeley where people are stopped time and again for rolling stops at a stop sign. I don't know anybody in my community who doesn't do that. And I have never seen a patrolman in my community who's stopping people. And so I'm thinking that one of the primary reasons for these disparities is that we have a concentration of police in certain neighborhoods. And that translates into disparate statistics.
So
And
those-
that should be addressed.
So those are interesting questions. Our beat maps, the way they're designed, is in a way of dividing the workload. So some neighborhoods in Berkeley are less dense, less populous, and demand less police services. And so those areas, the less service an area requests, the less calls for service, the less issues from neighborhood, because the neighborhood is just less dense, less people per square mile. It takes less cops to distribute that workload. And so some neighborhoods in Berkeley, the beats are larger, but we try to get the same one officer to deal with the service requests for that area. So some areas that are more dense have more cops in smaller areas. That's true. That is very true in the South Campus area. There's more the beats are smaller around the downtown area for that reason.
So
And
depending,
those are revisited every so
I
often.
don't agree with you.
so,
I don't.
yeah, Elliot, please, just step in.
Can I just tie what the work that's being done on the fair and impartial policing and data on the police stops? And this item is coming up on the 23rd on the council agenda. You know, we've been working on it, a whole group has been working on this for 5.5 years. And we've asked the department why the disparity, right? And we respect that there's not profiling or you're not racist, but why the disparity, especially the hit rate. You know, the people that are the people of color that are stopped, that are not issued a citation are wanting compared to the Caucasian people that are. And so, you know, okay, you're not, but why this disparity? And we haven't gotten a response from the department. And you know, so the item on the agenda on the 23rd deals with hopefully a professional group that will create these questions. And a lot of these questions were already created in the Stanford report. And so that's the issue, you know, why? You know, the question comes up whether it's valid or not. Is it individual officers? Is it individual sections? Is it a department, you know, internal implicit bias? So that's what we're dealing with. So.
Yeah, and I understand that. And we,
Right.
you know, if you remember, because I remember being in meetings with you earlier before we hired CPE, is that the issues there's so much complexity to the issue that we had to bring in an outside group who specialized in statistical analysis and, you know, regression analysis for all these different factors that, you know, we had to bring in experts. And even after we brought in the experts, they said we can't say this, we can't say that, we can't answer that question. But I think there's a lot of value in asking the hard questions. I think there's a lot of value in, you know, talking things out and hearing people and hearing things and trying to do better. And I think a lot of those things are already in motion. If we had to wait for the right answer to respond to the community, that'd be an issue too. You know, we know there's an issue that's reflected in those numbers, you know, the CPE talked about this. That issue is a societal issue, and this is, you know, it talks about the police department of Berkeley's interaction with a societal issue that may be systemic and bigger than the police department, and this is our interaction with the issue, and so that's concerning. But I don't think we should wait around for like, aha, now we know exactly what it was and whatever to listen and work on the issues.
And so, frankly, that's why we're here, because we don't need to wait around to find out all the complexities. If a policy like this will reinstill, if presuming that it existed at some point, trust in the police on the part of the community. Because this is percolating from the community. This is where this comes from. And so if we can pass a policy that will address the suspicionless searches in a way that it restores some faith in the police department and some trust that they're not implicitly biased, as all of us tend to be, then that's an achievement. And if we can get a policy that all the stakeholders can sign on to, that would be wonderful. And so that's where we're starting.
My problem is that in 2014, General Order B4 was passed. It's 2019 now.
Mm-hmm.
We're still experiencing the same disparities.
Mm-hmm.
And the BPD has not come up with the kind of analysis is needed to look at the raw data to determine if there's an issue, as Elliot said, with an individual officer, if it's something systemic within the department.
Right.
I would feel really great about the whole situation if BPD would move forward, bring on a data analysis individual, whoever, so we can get the raw data and see where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is not the same thing as the probation, but
Yeah.
that's a big issue for us.
Well, I just feel like whether it's an individual officer or whether it's implicit bias or systemic bias or whatever, one can enact policies that restrict those biases from being realized into action.
Yes.
And we can do training forever, but but I don't think that replaces policies that restrict. And it does two things. It restricts any possible bias in any individual officer, but it also maintains a value in civil rights for all people. I mean, I think suspicionless searches, I think waiving the Fourth Amendment for a large group of people is, frankly, goes against our Constitution.
Exactly.
And so, anyway, Terry, did you have something?
Just back to kind of process again. I understand, what Ellie was saying about the issues that are going to the council. And I sort of made myself clear on that at one of the recent commission meetings. I'm really disappointed that the department hasn't moved forward with some changes to address all the numbers and studies that are out there. And but I kind of look at that as an overall, and we'll see where that goes, I guess. We need to stay vigilant on making the recommended changes from the commission that went to the council. This is sort of a subset of that, the way I see it. And it's like if we could get to a policy here that at least takes something out that we can move forward with, that would be something that we could count. We don't know where it's going to go with the council and future studies and all that. But my disappointment with the department is the chief was there when I brought these up, is that there's so much data out there that points to the fact that something needs to be done about this issue in Berkeley. And I know the department's taken issue with some of the data and how it's represented and all that. But it's a nuanced kind of thing to me. It's not, the data's wrong. Maybe there needs to be some nuances to it because it needs to be relooked at in from various points of view. But the bottom line to me, after reading the Stanford report and understanding the issues, after reading the CPE report, after being on the commission and the subcommittee that made the recommendations, is that the department needs to move forward to address the issues that are out there. And the problem became, because of staffing issues or other issues, I guess, that the department's not moving forward with it. They've got a plan, but could be between now and 4 years from now or something, and as I already stated, it's been 4 or 5 years since we've been working on this. So that is my concern, but I don't think we're gonna figure that out today, but we need to keep that issue in the forefront and keep the pressure on to make sure the department comes up with something that would address the issues.
And we were
But
supposed to
here
have a
today,
task
if we
force, we
could-
never got.
Huh?
More than a year ago, they were supposed to form a task force.
Yeah,
That was part of the,
right. Well, it's just been a delay, let's put it that way. And at least if we could move forward on this one, we would have something we could hold our hand, kind of hold in our hand, and if nothing has happened quickly on the other one, we could at least move this forward to the council and say, do this, So anyway, that would be my thinking
It's
on it.
very clear, this is one portion of the whole issue.
Yeah, right.
So,
yes.
I think that the data collection is very important. I know that there were 6 categories, and now it's at 19 that's being requested by the RIPA WIPA. And, but to me, it's like I have this comment on, if you get data that says something over and over again, you can say, well, I don't like what it says.
Right.
But with this more categories, it might continue to show that there's a disparity. And that's why I think it's very important who interprets the data, how it's presented to the community, and how it's acted on. But if you have something that keeps saying over and over again, there's a disparity, and I'll say we myself from the NAACP and African American community, we see it as profile. So I'm just sharing that because of the data that was finally collected, being reported on by CPE, and folks are saying, well, the data's wrong. So that's my concern.
So from the department's perspective, I'm not, don't want you to think, I'm not attacking the data. I'm reading the report for, ways to improve as well, and so is the department. That's how we're looking at it. We commissioned that report to help digest the data. The one thing I would say though is, that there were also positive things that came back in those reports, and guidance that came back that we were looking for, and we have been working on these issues. There are complications that come down to, like, we can't, when we enlist the support of CPE, we're asking them the favor of doing this for us in the terms that they're telling us when they can provide the information and the analysis. So we're going back to them with another batch of data in the near future. So we'll have, that'll be the first update on the data since it was, the data came back last time. So we are doing things, we are working on the issues. It's just, there's been time, right? Time has passed.
Yeah. Just as overall advice, my advice would be, you would be a heck of a lot better off to pick some issues that are important in the community and move ahead to address those as a first step to show that you're paying attention, that you get it, and that some other things are gonna come along later, but at least you're moving forward and have a schedule. And that was my biggest complaint about the department's response to our commission recommendations, is that there's no schedule. There's no way to measure when things will happen. And what's happening, I'm a bit frustrated with it, being on the commission for 4 years and nothing really moving forward on it. And addressing it doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna do everything that's in a report. Addressing it means is that you're gonna take it seriously and take items out that need to be corrected in the department's opinion, and tell the community what you're gonna do and give them the schedule. That's the problem, because working on it, how many iterations of the CPE report and all these other, it's like it went on and on and on. There was a preliminary report that said basically the same thing. There was this final report that said basically the same thing. It's just been all process. And so what I think would be really important is to get some short-term results, but also have a schedule for the long term. That would be my thinking.
This is good, because this is feedback I will share. I'll take this back
So if I can just comment on this one last time, hopefully, that when I spoke before in the community about the respect that I have and the organization I would have for the BPD, it's real. And what you said earlier about the statistics showing that the city of Berkeley was better than other places doing the best, but sometimes there's still room for improvement. And that's what I think that you are addressing too, that this and that shows this is good, but there's still room for improvement.
Mhm.
That's what we're trying to do, is get that improvement, because everyone doesn't feel the same about that. But the respect to the department and what they're doing is here, and I'll continue to share that with the community.
Mhm.
And just one last statement on this issue. Chief Greenwood did tell us at one point he was bringing on a person, because once you get the data, then what are you gonna do with it? So, you know, he did state he was bringing on someone to deal with that aspect, and we're still waiting.
The data analysis?
Yes,
Yeah.
he both told Elliot and I that he was bringing on a data analysis person. And it's not how far, was that?
Well, how would that differ
About 2
from
years.
how would that differ from the analysis that the CPE already did?
It's a little different because this CPE provided raw data to the city. You know, identifying individuals being stopped, situations like that, but it doesn't break down, you know, what officers and what beat is making.
Oh, more
certain
detail.
stops and this and that, that kind of data is
I see.
more specific to.
Yeah.
And that will give the BPD an opportunity to perhaps bring an officer in and have a conversation with them
Mm-hmm.
and do an examination of the data related to that individual officer.
Okay. Let me ask a question at this point of everybody, and especially the commissioners, but others. What time pressures do you all have for the meeting today? What time pressures do you have? Do we
Oh.
need to be out of here by 12:30? What's
I
your,
need
what are
to
your
be out
time?
of here by 1.
Yeah, one, I need better by one.
Okay, all right. I'm kind of wondering whether we should start going through this now, or whether we should wait for some of these other stakeholders to start with us at the beginning. You know, we're talking about bringing somebody else from the parole or probation department, some other people from the community. So I don't know whether we wanna bring them in when we're halfway through going through this, whether we wanna stop now and bring them in at the beginning, whether we wanna try to conclude going through it.
What I'd like to see is BPD putting together a policy, you know, so that we can see what you would like, and then maybe while we're working on this policy, we might be able to come to some kind of agreement and incorporate both of them. But we need to see what they're thinking, and right now we don't know, because you haven't.
So for a few reasons, the policy adopted in Oakland isn't a great jumping off place for us, although it is really, I think, good to see the outcomes of that process and see the different approaches to language or to trying to tackle the issues and problems. I think it's all valuable. But it's not what we would propose.
Okay.
I don't think it's the best jumping off point, because especially on several issues, like, I'll give you one example.
So, but this policy doesn't say anything about the right of probation officers and parole officers to search those individuals. Those individuals have primary supervisory jurisdiction over parolees and probationers, right? And the reason other states confine such searches to those officers, absent suspicion.
No, the way the law is written, that any peace officer in the state.
Oh, in California, I know, I'm just saying.
It's not a primary, secondary relationship.
No, I understand, in California it's different, but I'm saying that I would prefer to have, that's their ball of wax for the parole officers. And so it's not as if we were to pass a policy like this, these people would never be searched and safety ensured. There's no suggestion anywhere that I've ever seen that California has a safer environment than other states because of these searches.
So what I would say is that is a great vein to explore with somebody that works at probation, because one of the things that happens in a state where it's set up as it is, that any peace officer, is that the resources, the number of probation officers is reduced significantly.
Okay.
So they have workloads and caseloads that limit their ability to do that, and because of that, peace officers in the state of California help with that aspect of
Yeah,
maintaining.
I understand. But I think what Gwen is, I actually think Gwen has a good point, and I think that maybe you and the chief, are there aspects of this Oakland policy or of the piece that we wrote, which is more strict, are there any aspects of changes to the search and or the questioning that the department would endorse? Or what aspects of current policy having to do with searches of parolees and probationers could the department agree to at this point? Just so we can see how far apart we are.
So I think we could, I think that's a great place to start, because I think we, one of the things looking through for the policies on these issues was like, oh, we haven't made statements in policy about certain things that we could go through. So I think there's a probably need to line some of these things out, call some of these things out, figure out the issues. And I just think we're closer on some than others, so with some issues than others.
I have a problem with the fact, most of the people, I generally, when I see an officer stop with someone, particularly an African-American person, when I get an opportunity to speak with them after the officer leaves, the first question is asked is, are you on parole or probation? Just generally, in many cases. And, that alone is a problem. To assume that the whole community is on parole or probation.
Yeah.
So, we just need, treat people, it's just really kind of simple, we want to treat everyone basically the same. If a person is in the community, in the public, minding their own business, being peaceful, why would you just force a search on them for no reason?
And I have a
Doesn't make
concern,
sense.
I'd like to know how many police are assigned to South Berkeley? Because I see droves of them. I don't care where I'm walking,
Well, that was,
I see it's just an over saturation. And I have, a relative that's a postal worker in North Berkeley,
sorry.
and they say they never see a police up there, ever.
Yeah.
They're delivering mail all over the place. So it sounds to me, and from my own eyes, that they're all going south.
Well, that was the question I asked the
I know
lieutenant.
you asked the question, but
Yeah.
I wanna know how many from your knowledge is being assigned down here? Because it's an oversaturation, I already know that, from observation. So, that would be helpful to me to see why, and North Berkeley doesn't have any, but we have 99 down over here. That doesn't make sense. It's not a balance at And you can't tell me that it's because in South Berkeley you have a lot of people of color. That's not true. If you look at the statistics, I know you're not gonna tell me that, but if you look at the statistics right now, today, I'm the minority in my neighborhood, okay? All the people that I grew up with, all the homes that I used to play in, all over, up and down, I knew everyone. I mean, from all the way down past Sacramento, all the way past Alcatraz, all the way going east. It's not that way anymore. So I don't understand why we have such a saturation of police officers when you have nothing but white people living there. So what's the problem? There's still this saturation, there's still people walking, giving stops. So there's something wrong here.
So I can tell you that race is not a factor when we distribute our beats for patrol officers. We have 16 patrol beats in the city. The distribution of calls for service, where they come from, it's a workload question. So we send our data to an outside company. They tell us these maps would evenly distribute the workload between your 16 officers that are working the 16 beats. And it has, the reason why there's positing that somebody might feel like, I want to see a lot of police, is because more calls come from denser populations, or more people live per square mile or per block, or and different areas in Berkeley have different densities.
And who's calling?
And
It's
who's
certainly
calling.
not me. I'm the minority in my neighborhood. But
And
yet I'm seeing all these policemen.
But
So
it is
it's not me
response-
calling.
It is the response to the number of calls for service. That's how we structure those.
Is it
Time
just
spent
calls,
on
or does it include stops?
calls for service? It would include stops.
It would include
and
stops,
it
so I
would
mean,
include time
that
spent
could
on calls.
So there's
distort the
no-
information,
This is
that could distort the information a bit versus just calls for service.
Elliot's been hoping to jump in.
Depends on how many stops and how many calls for service, right? I mean, you see how
The
that
stops
could work out,
Well,
right?
the stops officers make are part of their work.
Yeah, okay.
Elliot,
Can I suggest this, that, as I understand it, the Oakland policy was developed with a lot of input
yeah,
Right,
and study
yeah,
of other states for best policies.
right.
And that, to, whatever policy you put forth is gonna be questioned,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Meet and confer, whatever,
yeah,
and, that we use this model.
mhm,
You know, it was mentioned at the beginning, why reinvent the wheel?
Right.
I agree.
And, maybe address some of the key differences between the police, but deal with those and see if we can make any adjustment to that, and move forward to get this out into the public.
mhm.
Because if we bring all these people in,
Yeah.
we're gonna have a lot of
This will
meetings
be
and
next year, the
discussions,
year after.
and, the wheel has been invented.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, so that's my suggestion. I also wanna point out one important thing, that everybody should know in Berkeley. When we, in NAACP meetings, parents come on and say they're still giving, especially their teenage sons, the talk. And that, in 2019, is a phenomenal, outrageous, situation, that, African American teens have to walk on eggs,
Mhm.
in this city.
That's true.
And, I've never seen one of my white Caucasian friends ever talk about giving their kids, everybody sets morals and standards for their kids, but ever give them the talk. And, I think you know what I mean by the talk.
Yeah.
So, that's something we're dealing with, and everybody has to understand that in
Mhm.
Berkeley.
What I'd like to say is this, it wasn't always this way.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm a native Berkeleyan. It was not always this way. And that, people are coming in with, biases already from other states, and they're being hired into Berkeley. And Berkeley has always been a small community. You knew everyone. You went to high school with them, and most of our policemen were from Berkeley.
Yeah.
And then we start getting all these people with all this bias, and then you start having all this, just stopping and
Well,
harassing and all of that.
even absent bringing in people with biases, it changes when you're no longer a small town. So a small town like you're describing, everybody knows each other, they grew up together. If they didn't grow up together, at least they knew, they knew who each other was.
Right,
So people
right.
treated each other differently. So once it develops anonymity, that disappears. Again, I don't think that there's individuals in the department who are have any more implicit bias than anyone else. It's in our culture. And so the job is to have policies that don't allow it to flower. That's the point. That's the whole point of policy in general, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just to add a comment and a question. And the comment is that according to the June 20th East Bay Times, the largest ethnic group in Alameda County are Asians. And so when you talk about gentrification and white folks, it's not just that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a large population of Asians who are in your community now, and it's 7%, and you're going down all the time. So the fact that the number is going down, but these other populations are growing, is kind of a basis for a lot of people who have been here is concerned. So that's just a comment of who's in the fastest growing group in the country are Asians, and that's a reality,
That's not in my community. I'm
Right.
only speaking of my community.
Right, I'm speaking in
Yeah.
South Berkeley as well, who's buying homes and who's moving in. And the Asian population is Japanese, it's Chinese, it's India, the largest number of people in the world. And that's going to continue to grow like that. So we, as African American myself, are just cognizant of all. Still seems to be a lot aimed at us, while the other groups are getting larger. But they're not in the statistics. You don't hear about how many Asians are involved in these things, but that's just a comment I have. My question is, how do you fulfill a commitment I'm involved in? And I know you say this might be a long process.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any concept amongst the committee, how often you plan on meeting and for how long? Because to meet every week for 6 months, or is it
No.
a year, or a commitment? Because I had put down 12:32 from 11, and I'll stay.
11:30 to 12:30, is that what you're saying?
No. I said when I first came on, it was 11, and I know that
To 12:30.
Mr. Roberts had to leave, and now it's 1. So I'm just asking the
Yeah.
question.
No, you're-
Put it out there, is
Yeah.
what's the concept of, because I like
Right.
to fulfill a commitment and not just come for the first meeting or so.
Right.
And not show up again after I'm putting my time in, because
Right.
I don't have a great life, but it's mine.
I understand, and we all have the same situation, but yeah.
On that point, so, it seems like to me, if we either need to go through the Oakland policy
Mhm.
and sort of get a feel for where we're at
Mhm.
as step one, or we need to ask BPD
Mhm.
to look at the Oakland policy and come back and have a discussion after they've looked at it and see what they're supporting or not supporting. That would be one of two ways to, two ways to deal with it. So, we could give them our input, or they could come back with their vision of it, and then we could debate that.
My
Where-
preference would be to go through and construct our preferences,
Mhm.
and then ask the BPD to independently, say what they would
Mhm.
consider a good policy, and then we can see the differences. But I'd rather not wait for theirs before we construct ours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you on board with that?
Oh, and so I wanted to say about the meetings, I don't anticipate that this is the subcommittee, this is the committee.
That's what I'm saying.
And I don't anticipate that we will have more than, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 more meetings.
Okay,
After that, it'll go to the commissioner.
that's doable.
When
And
will
so,
we-
Trying to find out.
for inviting
Commissioner,
other folks.
I would just like to see the BPD come up with their policy and give them a timeline. I mean, if they can come up, just have them review what has been approved by Oakland. See what they think of it, come up with something that they might like, and then we review it, and we go from there to see what we wanna work with from what they.
My feeling is we shouldn't wait for them to go
If
first,
we're not
for
gonna
us
wait
to.
forever, we can give them some.
But why not have our own format, them see theirs, and then, you know, I
Because
hate
I
to,
don't see a problem with the open one. I mean, I'm in agreement with the open one.
Okay, there's
Unless
nothing
you
you-
wanna
there's
reinvent
nothing
the
you would-
wheel. No,
nothing you would change here.
I don't see anything in here that I would change,
Mhm.
except for maybe the 72 hours.
mhm.
I would change that. But otherwise, I think it's a very well-written policy.
Mhm.
And I just wanna see what Berkeley would like. But I don't want them taking 2, 3, 4 months to do it, because.
Terry, what's your,
I was just gonna,
I know you're
ask
not gonna be
Lieutenant,
with us.
I was just gonna ask Lieutenant Montgomery on getting feedback on their view of the Oakland policy, or getting your comments or something, and what would that take in order to get there?
I can tell you right now, we can give you feedback on the Oakland policy.
You say what?
We can give you feedback on the Oakland policy, we can tell you what works for us and what
Okay.
doesn't work.
Yeah, but how much time would that take?
How much time between meetings?
Hmm?
How much time between now and our next potential
Yeah.
proposed meeting?
I'm trying to find out too.
So when we talk about drafting a new policy from Oakland, that's a sort of a chunk of staff time that the chief would have to assign to somebody.
Mhm.
It could be that he assigns it to me, it could be that he assigns it to our professional standards or policy group. So that could be a process, a bit of a process, but I can definitely,
Mhm.
talk to the chief and kind of talk about, the issues I'm hearing and look at the Oakland policy and say, okay, this yes, this no, this no way.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think
In
we're-
general,
This or that.
I don't think we're
just a
talking about.
question, in general then, have you all looked at the Oakland policy and pretty much agree with where it is and with this, at this point, or no? You have? Okay.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like that would be, and so there, you know, like for me, there are certain, maybe few things that I might wanna tinker with in Oakland policy, but in general, it seems like it would be a reasonable way to go, but,
Absolutely.
so if that's the case, then maybe we should ask for their feedback initially.
Yeah, without asking for a full draft of a full
No.
policy, but just taking the Oakland policy and see what parts of it,
The key contentions.
yeah.
So what I told you already, the issues around limiting searches solely based on, only allowing them based on, violence is an issue. And limiting suspicion of searches of probationers, that probationers have agreed to, these are
Mhm.
consent searches is an issue. So there's sort of a whole lot of policy that is
Right.
pretty, it's a really big issue.
So for me, it would be helpful on that particular point, then if we're using it as a base, then that the department could say, you know, on section so-and-so, you know, we were recommending this, or this would be our position, or something like that, so we could like see it and sort of, read it and think about it a little bit before we do something.
Yeah, so it's kind of
You see what I'm
digest it like a stakeholder and say, I can agree with this, I can't agree with this, I agree with this in part.
So at least we know where we need to focus.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is that the search part of it would not be agreeable. In other words, the suspicionless, changing the suspicionless search by availability would not be, what you're saying is you wouldn't, that's what I heard you say.
So I think there's more issues there. I think, we'd be open to hearing about the different perspectives and different issues. Because it is tied to duties to the community, these are duties to prevent crime committed by probationers.
Well, but
They're serious issues for us. I think there probably could be, I suspect, that there could be ways of crafting language around suspicionless searches that would, might be found satisfying to the group, that we could come up with, that would also would say, Because basically what you're doing by removing suspicion searches or probation searches, you're saying no probation searches. That's basically what you're doing. Because if we had cause, we would just call it.
Well, except for those,
We would just call it probable cause.
except for the violent felons.
Right, but by limiting it, and even though,
Right,
you know, you're basically saying no searches of probationers because of probation. That's really where you are, in real life and in practice. It's the difference between reasonable suspicion to detain and then perhaps maybe the additional articulable facts that lead to probable cause to arrest, are probable cause to search, are often very close in time and understanding what's going on a stop. And so you're essentially saying no probation searches. It is my interpretation of it. That is a issue with public safety outcomes downstream, officer safety outcomes that I'm sure the union would be very concerned about. And because I know how these stops develop, and when you know and see and have reasonable suspicion, only reasonable suspicion, and when you have probable cause to search, that they can be just really kind of close in time and all immediate, all at once.
are you saying no searches because you're assuming people on probation aren't on probation for violent offenses? Because people on probation, on parole for violent offenses, this policy allows for searches.
Right, so there are a lot of issues around drawing the line at violent. What about possession of firearms?
Well, there's a very clear definition of what constitutes the violent versus non-violent.
The definition they decided to go to does, I believe, cover weapons offenses.
Well, that's something you can add and we
So
can
that's-
discuss.
That's what I'm saying.
What
These are
else?
issues.
Right.
Okay, so if you wanna change the
Could you give us your feedback on the Oakland plan in, say, 2 weeks or something?
I think so.
So, I mean, maybe we're better to
Yeah.
do that.
To wait 2 weeks.
If I could
Let me
interject,
just, yeah,
please, I think the Oakland plan was a gift to Berkeley. It's been studied, it's gone through different professional operations. To me, I think the PRC should come up with its plan and submit it to council and let the BPD present theirs to council. And then maybe you can, like Oakland did, maybe you can compromise, the two bodies can compromise and come out with a policy.
that didn't work so well in the Oakland situation, because they came up with pretty diverse things, and the council said, come on, go back and work together. So, I mean, I think it doesn't really work to present two radically different, we'll try to work something out
Yeah.
before we get to that stage.
Yeah, especially-
But I just, when you talk about duty to the community, it's, there's also a duty to not, in a disparate fashion, search people and question people. You're saying that you're not, but there's this serious perception out there that that's happening. And I think we have a duty, all of us, a duty to our communities to attempt to show fair and equal treatment. And if that's, if the perception is and the statistics show that there's disparate searches and questioning of people about their parole status, there's a duty to do something about that. There's a duty for public safety too, but there's this other duty that's, that needs to be considered.
So I don't disagree with you, and I don't think they necessarily have to be in conflict.
No, they don't have to be in
I think
conflict.
we can craft language
That's-
that respects that.
Yeah.
So I just want to add, we have a half an hour left, and I want to hear you keep talking about the comparisons, and I know that you got notes and you put time into it, you have a very keen eye. So in this time, I'd like to hear what those differences are.
Between the two versions?
Right, that you have, if that's
Does
possible.
that make sense?
No, because the Oakland one is not being used.
Okay.
OPD is not being used, so I don't think we need to keep trying to
There's-
compare.
okay.
This is what we need to stay
Well-
focused on, the one that was approved by the city council.
Okay,
But, the thing is that
I like to hear her
the,
comments.
like I said, the main difference that I see, there's one difference in timing in terms of how recently you need to have learned of somebody's status in order to search. But the other one is that in the commission policy that was approved by council, the officer would always have to check the record before a search. In the department policy, the Oakland department policy, that's strongly encouraged but not required when you learn of the status of an individual through asking them. To me, that's a significant difference. And one of the reasons it's significant is because, and this will be useful, I think, when we talk about whatever the department brings back to us. If one needs to search the record anyway, it is a disincentive to asking the individual the question. In other words, if I'm the officer and I ask the individual, are you on parole or probation? I have to anyway search the record to confirm that. So what's the point even asking him or her? And that's a good achievement. If there's a disincentive to asking the question, because I consider the question, people who are asked the question consider it disrespectful. In the policy that they've now approved, there's no incentive to asking the individual the question, which I think is great, because you have to check the record anyway. And so that's the major difference that I see, together with that timing issue. The other differences are minor wording, like, for example, the council policy, the commission policy adds words to the introduction. At the very first paragraph of the introduction, while these searches are a legitimate law enforcement tool, the department emphasizes that the mere fact that an individual is on probation, parole, mandatory supervision, or PRCS is not in itself a connection to criminal activity. Then there's another place where they talk about it's unjust to search. The department policy doesn't include that kind of language about just kind of like interpretive language. The council language is a little bit more, elaborates on why we're doing this. It's unjust to search. The department is more straightforward. It doesn't use that kind of language. But in terms of substance, it's really about the check of records, I think. That's what I found.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you have a plan of letting the department come back in 2 weeks and see if we can reach some different language. If not, we can still go forward with the policy. But that sounds like a plan and best way to move forward.
Okay. What do you think, Commissioner Roberts?
I agree.
Gwen?
I agree.
So what I can do is I can take that desire to kind of proceed that way back to the chief and back to my boss and
Basing off of the Oakland plan, what can we,
at minimum, getting feedback as to where the major issues are,
Right.
things that I don't want to say is that I can proffer
full-fledged
or version or anything like that.
No, we're just looking for the issues, and it would be nice to be able to get them by section in Oakland. It's like, well, here's the issue we have with this, or here's what we propose as an alternative, or something like that.
Well, what I'll tell you is I'll take that desire of the commission back, and I'll let you know, I guess, through Byron.
As to what?
I'll let you know through Byron if that's amenable to the staff time and the chief, how the chief wants to proceed.
Okay, well,
I think it's probably gonna be okay, I just don't wanna promise.
Yeah, well, because I was thinking,
something else.
yeah, I mean, if we tried to set a meeting or something now would be preferable. That way people are working to a deadline.
Well, I think we have work to do. I presume we're gonna be able to do it. I just,
Right.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I wanna let you know about limitations.
okay, so
Either
either we
that-
could meet, if we met on the 31st, would you join us? When do you finish?
He said he'd finish after
You
the.
can't finish.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, you said the end of the month, I thought maybe the 31st.
I think he meant after our PRC meeting.
I know.
Yeah, no, actually, I was, I'm around to the end of the month.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, I could.
Well, 2 weeks from
Is that 2 weeks?
2 weeks
I mean,
today,
they need what?
2 weeks would be the first.
Pardon?
2 weeks from today would be the 1st of August. I'm just
Of August.
saying that the day before that's the
Terry, you
31st.
can stay on as a citizen.
Pardon?
You can stay on as a citizen and complete this.
When are you available
Yeah.
on the 1st?
August first?
Uh-huh.
What day of the week is that?
Thursday, 2 weeks from
Oh,
today.
yeah. I'm available.
Are you available that day? What days are you available?
I'm on vacation the last week of July and the first week of August.
Oh dear.
Okay, so, do we wanna do it the second week of August then? Maybe that'll give you more time?
The 8th?
It won't be, because I'm gonna be away.
But
so-
he's gonna,
No,
I
you're
assume
gonna be away,
that,
but then somebody else might.
is the
be
chief
away.
gonna assign this to somebody else, or?
Perhaps. I'll do rather leave the project with me since I've.
Right, since you've been here.
I think that would be good.
So what does that mean in terms of dates?
When would you be available?
It means next week or after August, the first.
Well,
week of
next week
August.
doesn't give you much time, does it?
Well, it would make it tougher.
Okay, yeah.
What is the 8th look
I mean, I can meet the 25th, which is next week.
But
I
that's
don't
not
know whether
giving
you
him
have any
time. He has
feedback
to
by
have-
then. I know.
Right.
I think we should give Lieutenant Montgomery time to, maybe he can get it done before he leaves. You're leaving the last week.
How about August 14th, which is a Wednesday?
Next Thursday.
August 14th.
You come back when?
August
You
14th.
come back when?
Is that a good one?
Yeah, we can make that.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
What's that, August 14th?
What time?
That's a Wednesday.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
What time do you wanna meet?
I'm thinking.
I may or
this-
may not be here, depends on how they do my
I have to do it at 11.
replacement, yeah.
Okay,
11 to 1?
11.
Or
11 o'clock on the,
11 to what, at 12:30 or
Yeah,
what?
whatever, okay, but
11 on the
Okay.
14th.
that'll be 11, okay.
The other thing, that gives us each time to, you won't be able to join us at that point, right?
Well, I might be, depending if I'm a legitimate member or not, or I could do a citizen thing. I'm around, I'll be around
So that gives us
So I put it
time,
on my calendar and we can work on whether or not I would be
That'll be
a
great.
voting member or a citizen member or something.
in the meantime, yeah, well, I think, they wanna see who else wants to join us.
Right, so they're gonna probably find someone.
Somebody.
But I think, Terry,
Meeting.
your input would be, is valuable.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Your input is valuable to follow through with.
So even if you're not as you see, we're all kind of like.
Yeah, no, I understand, sure.
Did you say the last, 11 o'clock also?
Yes. And that gives us all time to really,
Bear down on it,
bear down on the
policy,
policy
yeah.
and see what we wanna do.
right. Yeah. So, we have agreement, right? All right, and
So
thank you for your commitment
Thank you
to,
very much.
do you have, that on your calendar, Lieutenant?
I will.
11 a.m. Will you all be able to join us
Sure.
that day?
What day did you pick?
The 14th,
Okay.
Wednesday morning at 11?
Okay.
Any, further public comment?
Great meeting.
Christine, did you wanna?
Yes, I'm not gonna comment on the topic today. I think I need to digest everything that was said. However, I did want to address a personal issue, and I put together a GoFundMe account for our particular housing situation. If anybody's interested in pitching in whatever you can, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
where do we find it?
I can email the chair and she can share it, maybe?
Okay, that
Would
sounds
that be
good.
appropriate?
Uh-huh,
Or the secretary?
yeah.
Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay.
All right, the meeting's adjourned.
thank you all for coming,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And-
Yeah.